I'm just obsessed with lip liners and lipsticks in general, and I can't leave the house without them. I just decided to take matters into my own hands.
The dark side of Kylie Jenner's success. What they don't show, everyone sees the empire.
Kylie Jenner, the billion-dollar baby sister of the Kardashian-Jenner family.
I mean, it's definitely normal for me. The cameras were around since I was 9 years old.
Fashion-forward and trend-setting, she has the internet in the palm of her hand.
The flawless photos, the billion-dollar headlines. But what if the real story of Kylie Jenner isn't about how she rose?
I didn't choose you. You were just a gift from God.
Am I your favorite child?
Yes.
True.
But what it quietly cost her to stay there? Because behind the perfectly curated image, there's a side of success that rarely makes it to the screen.
Kylie Jenner was once hailed as the youngest self-made billionaire. She was absolutely unstoppable on social media, and every single product she sold out in seconds.
A world where visibility becomes pressure, where every post is strategy, where privacy slowly disappears, and expectations never stop rising. The kind of success that looks effortless, but demands constant control. So here's the question no one really asks. What happens when your entire life becomes the brand? And more importantly, who are you allowed to be when millions are always watching? It starts with a screen, not a stage, not a boardroom, not even a business plan. A screen small enough to fit in your hand, but powerful enough to shape how millions of people see you. That's where the story of Kylie Jenner really begins. Not with billion-dollar valuations or product launches, but with visibility. Constant, unfiltered, and impossible to turn off, because long before Kylie became a business headline, she was already something else. Watched. Growing up inside the ecosystem of keeping up with the Kardashians meant that her identity wasn't developed in private. It was constructed in public. Every phase, every change, every insecurity, documented, discussed, and consumed. And here's where it gets complicated. When your life is observed before it's understood, who decides who you are? This isn't just about fame, it's about timing. Most people figure themselves out quietly, making mistakes in spaces that don't follow them forever. But Kylie's transformation from a teenager into one of the most recognizable faces in the world happened under a microscope. And that microscope didn't just observe, it influenced. Because once millions of people are watching, expectations begin to form. And expectations have a way of shaping behavior. Now fast forward to the moment everything seems to change. The launch of Kylie Cosmetics. On the surface, it looks like a perfect entrepreneurial story. A young woman leveraging her influence to build a beauty brand that sells out within minutes. Lip kits disappearing in seconds. Revenue skyrocketing. Headlines calling her the youngest self-made billionaire. But pause for a second. Was this purely business brilliance? Or something more layered? Because Kylie didn't just sell products. She sold a transformation. The lips, the aesthetic, the identity that millions of followers had already been watching her evolve into. And when people bought her products, they weren't just buying makeup. They were buying access to that transformation. That's powerful. But it also creates a subtle pressure most people never think about. When your brand is built on your image, maintaining that image stops being optional. It becomes operational. Every post, every appearance, every detail has to align with what people expect. Because if the image shifts too much, the business feels it. So here's the question. At what point does personal identity become a business obligation? Because with Kylie, the line is almost impossible to see. Her social media presence, hundreds of millions of followers across platforms, is one of the most valuable digital assets in the world. A single post can generate massive engagement, influence trends, and drive sales instantly. But that level of reach doesn't come without structure. It requires consistency. And consistency at that scale means control. Think about it. Lighting, angles, timing, captions, brand alignment, nothing is random. Even moments that feel spontaneous are often part of a broader content strategy. And while that's incredibly effective from a business perspective, it raises another question. How much of what we see is real, and how much of it is designed? Because when your life becomes content, authenticity itself becomes complicated. Now layer in the business side. In 2019, a majority stake of Kylie Cosmetics was sold to Coty Inc. for around $600 million, valuing the brand at approximately $1.2 billion at the time. It was positioned as a massive success, proof that Kylie had built something extraordinary, and she had. But the story didn't end there. Soon after, questions began to surface around valuation, revenue reporting, and the accuracy of the self-made billionaire narrative. Forbes, which had previously given her that title, later revised its stance, suggesting that the numbers may have been inflated. Now, whether intentional or not, that shift revealed something important. In the world of celebrity business, perception can sometimes move faster than verification. And when your brand is tied to both image and financial success, those two things can start reinforcing each other in ways that are hard to separate. So again, ask yourself, are people buying the product or the story around it? Because with Kylie, the two are deeply connected. But beyond the headlines and the deals, there's a quieter layer to all of this. One that doesn't trend. One that doesn't go viral, the psychological weight. Living under constant visibility means there's no true off switch. Even moments of silence are interpreted. Even absence becomes a statement. And when millions of people are watching, reacting, commenting, there's an invisible pressure to keep delivering, to stay relevant, to stay interesting, to stay on. And that's where the dark side starts to reveal itself, not as something dramatic or obvious, but as something persistent, subtle, always present. Because success at this level isn't just about building something, it's about sustaining it. And sustaining it means continuously meeting expectations that never really stop evolving. Now think about privacy, or more specifically, the lack of it. Kylie's relationships, her family life, her appearance, her business decisions, everything becomes part of public conversation. Analyzed, debated, sometimes criticized, often misunderstood. And while fame brings influence, it also removes something fundamental: control over how you're perceived. You can shape the image, but you can't fully control how it's interpreted. And when your identity is also your product, that loss of control becomes more than personal. It becomes financial because perception affects engagement. Engagement affects sales, sales affect valuation. It's all connected. So maintaining relevance isn't just about ego, it's about economics. And that changes how you move. It changes what you share. It changes what you hold back. But here's where it gets even more complex. Because while the outside world sees luxury, private jets, mansions, designer everything, the internal experience might be something very different. Structured, managed, strategic, a life that looks free, but operates on constraints. Because when your image is worth hundreds of millions, you don't just live your life, you manage it. And that's a very different kind of existence. Now consider the audience. Millions of young followers watching, absorbing, comparing, seeing the lifestyle, the beauty, the success, and often measuring themselves against it. And whether intentionally or not, that creates a feedback loop. Kylie posts, the audience reacts, the reaction reinforces the content, and the cycle continues. But what does that do to perception, not just of her, but of success itself? Because if success is always presented as flawless, effortless, perfectly curated, it sets a standard that isn't just high, it's unrealistic. And yet, it's incredibly effective, because aspiration drives attention, attention drives influence, and influence drives revenue. So even the illusion, if it is one, has value. But again, at what cost? Because maintaining an idealized version of life requires constant alignment between reality and presentation. And when those two drift apart, the pressure to correct it can become intense. So you start to wonder, Is the lifestyle controlling the person? Or is the person still in control of the lifestyle? And maybe there isn't a simple answer. Because what makes Kylie Jenner's success so fascinating isn't just how fast it happened. It's how many layers exist beneath it. A personal identity shaped in public, a business built on that identity, a global audience reinforcing both, and a system where image, influence, and income are all deeply intertwined. So as we move forward, the question becomes sharper. What happens when the system gets bigger? When the expectations grow even higher? When the gap between public image and private reality becomes harder to manage? Because in the next part, we're going to step deeper into the side most people avoid. The controversies, the criticisms, the pressures behind the scenes, and the realities that don't make it into the perfectly curated feed. And once you see that side, you might start looking at success very differently. If the first half of this story felt layered, this is where it becomes uncomfortable. Because the moment you stop looking at Kylie Jenner as just a success story and start looking at the system around her, you begin to notice the tension. Not loud, not dramatic, but constant. And it starts with something most people overlook: sustainability. It's one thing to go viral, one thing to build a billion-dollar brand, but sustaining relevance in a space that constantly replaces yesterday's trend with today's obsession, that's a completely different challenge. Because attention doesn't stay still. It moves, it shifts, it forgets. And for someone whose empire is built on attention, that creates a silent pressure to continuously evolve without losing identity. So how do you stay relevant when the very thing that made you famous is no longer new? Kylie's answer has been adaptation, product expansions, rebranding phases, new launches under Kylie Cosmetics and Kylie Skin, strategic collaborations. But behind every relaunch is a signal, an acknowledgement that momentum doesn't maintain itself. It has to be rebuilt again and again, and that cycle can be exhausting. Because each new launch isn't just about introducing something new. It's about proving that you still matter. Now layer in criticism. At Kylie's level, criticism doesn't stay contained. It amplifies. Accusations of overpricing, questions about product quality, debates around originality, conversations about whether the brand relies more on image than innovation. And then there's the deeper critique, the one that goes beyond business, the idea of self-made. When Forbes initially labeled her the youngest self-made billionaire, it sparked admiration. But when that narrative was later challenged, it triggered something else entirely: skepticism. Because people began asking, what does self-made actually mean in a world where visibility itself is inherited? And that question doesn't just apply to Kylie. It reflects a broader tension in modern success culture: the intersection of privilege, opportunity, and execution. Kylie didn't start from nothing, but she also didn't do nothing. And that gray area, that's where most of the debate lives. But here's the thing: debate doesn't just stay intellectual. At this level, it becomes personal. Because when your identity is tied to your brand, criticism of the brand becomes criticism of you. And that's where the psychological cost deepens. Every headline, every viral tweet, every trending topic, it all feeds into a constant stream of feedback that's impossible to fully ignore. And even if you don't read it, you know it's there. So you adjust, you refine, you control. But control, at this scale, is never complete, because the internet doesn't just consume content. It interprets it, reframes it, sometimes distorts it. And once a narrative takes hold, it can be incredibly difficult to shift. Which raises another question: how do you maintain authenticity when millions of people are constantly rewriting your story? Now let's talk about comparison. Not Kylie comparing herself to others, but the world comparing itself to Kylie. Because her lifestyle, private jets, luxury vacations, designer wardrobes, doesn't just exist in isolation. It's broadcast, repeated, amplified across platforms where people are already vulnerable to comparison. And that creates a feedback loop that's rarely discussed. People see the highlight, they internalize it as a standard, and then they measure their own lives against something that was never meant to be a baseline. So while Kylie's success inspires millions, it also unintentionally contributes to a culture where success looks effortless, immediate, and perfectly curated. And that perception, can be damaging. But here's where it becomes even more complex, because Kylie herself is also inside that system. She's not just the creator of the image, she's also bound by it, meaning she has to continuously live up to a version of herself that the world expects, a version that doesn't age normally, doesn't evolve quietly, doesn't get to disappear, and that creates a paradox. The more successful the image becomes, the harder it is to step outside of it. So you start to wonder, is this freedom or a different kind of limitation? Because while the lifestyle looks unlimited, the structure behind it is anything but. Now consider the business landscape. The beauty industry is one of the most competitive markets in the world. New brands launch constantly. Trends shift rapidly. Consumer loyalty is fragile. And social media, which once acted as Kylie's biggest advantage, is now saturated. Everyone is building a brand. Everyone is telling a story. Everyone is competing for the same attention. So maintaining dominance isn't just about having followers, it's about converting that attention into sustained trust. And trust, unlike attention, is much harder to scale because it requires consistency over time. It requires transparency. And sometimes it requires vulnerability. But vulnerability at Kylie's level is complicated because showing too much can disrupt the brand, and showing too little can make it feel distant. So every move becomes a calculation. What to reveal, what to protect, what to amplify, and what to quietly remove. Which brings us back to the central tension of her success. It's not just about building something massive, it's about maintaining something fragile. Because underneath the scale, the visibility, the valuation, there's a system that depends on perception staying aligned with expectation. And when that alignment slips, even slightly, the effects ripple outward. Engagement shifts. Narratives change, momentum slows. And suddenly, the same system that built the empire starts demanding more from it. More content, more innovation, more relevance. So, the question becomes sharper. How long can anyone sustain that pace? And more importantly, what happens if they don't want to? Because stepping back at this level isn't simple. You don't just disappear. You don't just take a break. Because when your business, your brand, and your identity are all interconnected, stepping back from one affects the others. So even rest becomes strategic. Even silence becomes intentional. And that's a reality most people never see. But maybe that's the point. Because the dark side of success isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's structural, built into the very system that creates the success in the first place. And Kylie Jenner's story is one of the clearest examples of that system in action. A system where visibility creates opportunity, opportunity creates wealth, wealth creates expectation, and expectation creates pressure. A loop that doesn't just continue, but intensifies. So as you look at the lifestyle, the photos, the products, the headlines, pause for a moment and ask yourself, are you seeing the full picture or just the part designed to be seen? Because once you start questioning that, everything shifts. The luxury feels different, the success feels more complex, and the person behind it all becomes more human. Now let's talk about you. After seeing both sides, the empire and the pressure behind it, what do you really think? Is Kylie Jenner's success a perfect example of modern entrepreneurship, or a system that comes with hidden costs most people aren't prepared for? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know how you see it. If this perspective made you think differently, don't just scroll away. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to see beyond the surface, and subscribe to CelebSpot for more deep, cinematic breakdowns of fame, power, and the realities they don't show you. Because here, we don't just follow the story, we reveal what's behind it.